And I want to introduce to everybody Jill Neeson. She is the education coordinator at Child Watch. So her job is primarily to go around to the schools and teach on the golden rules and safety tools curriculum that we have for the elementary age kids in our region. And she can tell you a little bit more about that. She has her doctorate in early childhood education, and she does abuse education for a lot of different daycare providers and early childhood centers in our region as well. So I'm just really excited. This has been a training we've been anticipating for a long time because we just think it's so important. And I know she is just a wealth of knowledge in this area. So if anybody has questions at all, please don't hesitate to use this time to ask her anything you think of. So Jill, it's all you.
Okay, well, thank you for the very nice introduction and the vote of confidence and me knowing lots of things. I have done this class for probably about 10 to 12 years with the early childhood educators. This is kind of a little different because I usually train on the front end and you guys are on the back end. Okay, so I usually come in as the kids are in our centers and we're looking for signs of abuse, and that's where we report. And then that's when the CPS comes in, and then what you guys are doing is you've already got them. That's already happened. We've already identified it. You know, they've already went through the process, and then you guys are assigned to get them through the court process. So I took out some of the things that are not relevant as far as the slides that I teach some of the early childhood educators, and I put in the things that are just kind of general. Okay, so if you have any questions or anything about anything that pops up, just I'm very informal, just to ask, and you know, even if it's something that seems not relevant, but you know, you want to know something, that's welcome as well. So the first thing I want to share with you is as being an educator, one of the things that I do constantly is research, and I want to stay up on, you know, what's going on, what's current, what are the numbers, what are we looking at, why is this even important, why is this even something we want to talk about. So I know you guys probably know these stats as well, but Kentucky is the #1 in child abuse. You know, that is something we do not want to be #1 in. Basketball, okay. Child abuse, no. So the stats that I have for 2017 is that 110,000 total referrals for child abuse and neglect were reported in 2017, and 56,000, a little bit over 56,000 reports were referred for investigation. Okay, these are the cases that have been reported, and that's a lot of children that we have out there having to report on. You know, that's some scary statistics when you start getting them to those six numbers. So from 2016, we had a 12% increase in child abuse reporting. And we can look at that whether, you know, is child abuse actually increasing, or are we having an increase in reporting? Okay, that can go either way because the research doesn't have like specific numbers as to which way that it goes. I would like to think that we're reporting more as opposed to having more children being abused. We're educating children to know that they can tell if they have something that's going on. They know that they have trusted adults that they can tell if they're having an issue. And that's what Stephanie kind of mentioned. That's what I've been doing this past year, is going into the schools and sharing the safety tools and golden rules with the children from, well, I do some preschool, but mostly it's kindergarten through the 6th grade. But what we teach them is to know that, you know, that's not normal. That's not something that you have to put up with. Children do have rights. They have the right not to be abused. And that's not normal for grown-ups to hit you or punch you or do the things that you feel are abused in any way, shape, or form. And that you have adults that you can tell, that your teachers, you know, people at your church, your mom or dad, your grandparents. So there are people out there that you can trust, that you can get help from. And that's kind of the premise of what we go into the schools and teach. And we do it on a kid-friendly basis. It's all developmentally appropriate. I have learned some things from the children that are not in my presentation that I'm like, okay, I didn't know that you should know that in the 3rd grade. But it's actually shocking to know how much that these kids do know. And actually talked to our executive director about, you know, we need to beef up our presentation a little bit because these children are knowing more than what we're presenting. And you guys as counselors are probably seeing those things in court, where you're seeing situations where children are, you know, they have some knowledge that they shouldn't have from our perspective, that they shouldn't have at the age that they have it. So the first slide that I have is it's important to know what child abuse is, how to identify it, and how to report it. Okay, so there's 3 separate things that we're going to talk about. First thing that we need to know is we need to know the law. There is actual laws that protect children from child abuse. They're on the books. The numbers, I've got my papers all spread over here, so I'm gonna get this. The actual KRS is 600.020. It actually is the law about abused children, and it lays it out very clearly about what the rights of children are, and they do have a right to be safe and be protected from harm. So if you want to refer to that, I can give you any of this information if you just let Stephanie or Jen know. The next one is to be able to identify the signs of possible child abuse. You know, what are we actually looking for? What is the difference between I'm 2 years old and I'm running and I'm falling on the playground and get an injury versus I've been abused at home kind of injury. So we need to learn how to identify it. What are we looking for? The difference between, you know, what a child is capable of doing on the playground as far as injury, as opposed to someone hurting them at home. And also report suspicious behavior to the proper authorities. Now this is where it gets a little bit, you know, people are afraid to report. They're afraid to report because they don't want to get in people's business. They're afraid to report because they really are not sure. They're afraid to report because they don't know if that's actual child abuse or whether it's something that, you know, a child got hurt from falling somewhere. So it's scary for a person to actually go and to that next step and report, hey, you know, we've got a situation that needs to be investigated. So we kind of talk about that, of who we report to and what the process is after that report. So there's some benefits to knowing this information, and they both have to do with protection of the child and protection of the reporter as well. So the first one is that we're the first line of defense for children. So this is from the perspective of being an early childhood educator. We spend a lot of time with these children. If you have a child in childcare, you know that sometimes they're there for 18 hours a day. I have situations where we've got children in there from open to close. They're there as soon as the door opens, and they're there as soon as the door locks. So think about the teachers that are with those children that many hours a day. They're going to be the ones that see things that are a little amiss. They're going to see that, you know, that doesn't look right, or they're going to see a pattern of, you know, this child has a bruise and it's turning colors, and then they have another one in the same area that's fresh, you know. So they're going to be the ones that see these little things changing as far as that. So we need to know that we are the first line of defense and to save a child. Okay. Unfortunately, children, thousands of Kentucky's children are abused and neglected each year. You know, there's thousands and thousands that probably go unreported. That's the scary part. Think about the ones that are reported and the numbers and stats we have on that. Think about what doesn't get reported. Okay. So is there any questions or anything so far about knowing the law, identifying child abuse and reporting? Okay, you guys are like, you know, you know all this stuff, so I'm kind of talking to somebody that doesn't, that may not know. Okay, so the second thing or the third thing we're going to talk about is protection from the law. Sometimes people don't want to get involved because they don't want, you know, people to have their children taken away. They don't want to get involved and maybe having to testify. It kind of boils down to they just don't have the correct information of what happens in the process of what happens once that you report. So reporting child abuse is as simple as calling the CPS and the child abuse hotlines if a child is suspected of abuse. You do not have to have proof. You don't have to have, you know, pictures. You don't have to have anything like that. You just have to suspect that something is going on, and then they handle it from there. One thing that we have to be careful of, especially from an early childhood educator point of view, and probably ACOSTA as well, is making assumptions that something isn't what it really is, or asking too many questions, being leading when you're talking to a child. Let them tell you the story instead of setting them up to go down the path of what you think might have happened. That's where things can go sideways really quick. So you have to protect yourself as well as protect the child. So to make sure that if we know the law and we can identify it and report it correctly, then we don't have to worry about getting into any kind of legal fallout ourselves. Okay. So this one just kind of describes the children's rights. They're free from abuse and neglect. I mean, that is the right of any person, but it should be the right, especially for a child, because they can't, if they're being abused, they can't pack their suitcase and leave. I'm 3 years old and I'm being mistreated and things are not going the way that I need them to be going, and I'm getting hurt and I don't like it, so I'm going to pack me a backpack and I'm going to walk out the door. That just doesn't happen. So what needs to happen is the adults in their life, the teachers and the people in their neighborhood, the people at their church need to be aware of a child's rights so that we know that we can protect it. Okay, it's not just that we think that children should be taken care of and be safe, but Kentucky also revised a statute, and this is 620.010. They require it. Okay, these laws are requiring that children have the right to be free from neglect and abuse. So they're not just talking about it, they actually have laws to make it concrete. Okay, children have certain fundamental rights which must be protected and preserved, including but not limited to the rights to adequate food, clothing, and shelter, the right to be free from physical, sexual, or emotional injury or exploitation, the right to develop physically, mentally, or emotionally to their potential, and the right to educational instruction and the right to secure, stable home. That's what that law kind of states. That's kind of a summary of that. And what we do as adults and the responsible people in their life is to make sure that they have that. So kind of from the front end, from the early childhood educators, we see, this stuff is going on. We see that a child comes in and, is so hungry at breakfast because they haven't eaten over the weekend. And that's where, the reports start. We've got some issues of neglect here, so we're going to report. And then they may end up being taken from their home, and that's when you guys get assigned to them and see them and making sure that they're in homes that are, they have food, they have shelter, and they're protected, and of course their educational needs are being met. So there's really all kinds of levels when you go in and talk about child abuse and reporting and the things that we do. There's so many levels and layers. It's important at every stop. Everybody that's on every level is an important player. So it's important just to kind of know like the baseline. Okay, so this kind of talks about the law. It defines child abuse, the maltreatment that results in or creates risk of harm or injury. It's not an accident, okay? It's abuse if adults commits, if an adult, commits abuse, allows abuse to occur, or fails to act as far as neglect. We're not taking care of basic needs. We're not feeding the child. We don't have proper clothing. We're not making sure they have a roof over their head. Or if you are a spouse or a boyfriend or girlfriend and you're allowing someone to mistreat your child, that you're an abuser. You're a standby abuser. And also, if you're the perpetrator. So that kind of talks about the law and what the definition of what we're kind of actually looking at. Okay, the law also identifies who has to report. This is across the board. It's mandatory to report child abuse, period. It doesn't matter who you are. It used to be that we thought that professionals like teachers and doctors and nurses, and those are the people that report. Those are the ones that have to report it. And if we see something happening in the neighborhood and we really don't want to get involved, we don't have to report it. But that's not true. Everybody has a responsibility and are mandated. If you see a child in a dangerous situation, being abused or neglected, you have to report it. And one of the things that I talk to my early childhood educators about is making sure that they follow up. So if they tell their director or their owner there's an abuse suspicion, that we think something's going on, they have to make sure that that report is made and follow up. It's not the responsibility of the supervisor to do it. It could lay on their desk. It could get lost in the shuffle. So whoever identifies it needs to make sure that they follow through. So just, from a CASA point of view, if you see something, it's not just enough to talk to, Jen's, Stephanie, and Liz. I've seen this. You have to work with them to follow up and make sure that that gets reported and that child gets into a safe environment. Okay. All right. So why would an adult hesitate or choose not to report child abuse or neglect when there is reasonable cause? This is where it gets a little, questionable. It's like, why would somebody not want to do that? Well, from our end, a lot of it is they fear losing business. Early childhood centers are, they make money off of the children that are in there. So if they report and, start something and upset the parents and kids start pulling out, so it's a financial thing that they might be hesitant. They might be have a fear of retribution from the families. You know, that can make people mad when you get the police called on, the CPS called on. That can get some things started that, you know, the fallout could be pretty ugly. But guess what? You know, it's going to be ugly if you don't report and that child gets hurt. You know, we don't want to have that on our hands either. Also, loyalty to the family. When the staff has the relationship and the teachers have a relationship with that family and they have to report it, you know, they kind of feel loyal to the family, so maybe they're hesitant about reporting that. And also they believe that it's not appropriate to intrude in people's business. I think that's the big one that I hear. It's like, oh, we don't want to get involved in people's business. I don't like people in my business, so I don't want to get in their business. But the big picture is, if you have that mindset, you know, a child is going to get injured. A child is, you know, it could lead to death. And there's stories that, you know, I could bring up and we could read in the news that that's where it starts. It doesn't get reported. It's something small. And then we end up reading that this child is, you know, it's a fatality in the end. Okay. You can't be sued if you act in good faith. So we have to understand that, you know, if we call and, you know, they don't go in and find anything and the child does not get removed from the home, you can't be sued for reporting it. Okay, I think that also makes people nervous because they're like, oh, well, wonder if I'm wrong and am I going to get in trouble? The only thing that you can get in trouble with legally is if little Johnny's mom makes me mad at the end of the day, so I'm going to call CPS on her. Okay, so CPS comes and creates a report and investigates, and it's nothing to it, and it kind of leads back just because she made me mad in the afternoon. That's when you can start getting into some legal trouble. So if you do it in good faith and your intention is, you know, that was my thought that maybe this child was in danger, then we don't have to worry about any kind of legal fallout. And this talks about the law that identifies the consequences, that if you don't report, you could get up to 90 days in jail, and you could also get a fine of $250. Okay, that's if you see something and just turn a blind eye and walk away, and the investigation finds out that you were aware of it. There are some legal consequences. So it's always good to report just to keep the child safe and also to keep you out of legal trouble. Okay, there's 4 types of abuse that we kind of focus on. There's probably many that kind of offshoot of these 4, but these are the 4 that we kind of focus on. The first one is neglect. The second one, physical abuse. And then we talk about head trauma in the early childhood centers. And if you guys work with any young children with CASA, you probably need to be aware of that as well. Sexual abuse and emotional abuse. Okay, so to be observant and look for the physical indicators and behavior indicators. So it's not enough sometimes to see bruises. We can also see how the behavior in children change. We have a child that comes in and they're loving and playing with other children and happy-go-lucky, and then you start seeing a decline and they're pulling back a little bit. They're in the corner. They start reverting to, you know, sucking their thumb, or maybe having accidents where they've been potty trained for a year or 2. So behavior also is connected with the physical indicators as well. Now this is where it kind of gets, you know, confusing, because some of this could be associated with a child going through a divorce in their family. It could be some environmental things, could be family things. So it's kind of, you have to kind of turn yourself into an investigator, if you know, if that's the appropriate word, to kind of look and see, you know, what's going on. Is there something going on as far as abuse, or is this a family change or an environmental change? What's happening to my happy-go-lucky child that, you know, was loving me last week, and this week he's changed to a whole different person? So you kind of have to like put a puzzle. It's kind of like putting a puzzle together. You have all your pieces and you see where they fit in the end, if that makes sense. Okay, so distinguish physical abuse from accidents. Now this is the important part, because children, you guys know kids, they jump and hop, and we have some jumping off of roofs and some that will climb up on the jungle gym and, you know, do flying, whatever that's called, that the WWE does off the rail, those flying jumps, and they have no fear. You know, the likelihood of them falling and getting hurt and having bumps and scrapes are very high. Okay, so it's the history. Do I see a history of bruises in places that a child normally does not get a bruise when they fall? Okay, I like to think about, if you fall think about what you hit. You hit your palms, you could hit your knees, sometimes you hit your forehead. So think about when you fall, what you would hit. That's usually the developmental part of what a child is going to injure. When we start seeing things behind the ears, on the neck, under clothing, suspicious areas, that's when we need to, heighten our awareness and be a little bit more vigilant and paying attention to what's going on. The size and the shape, if you can see the outprint of or the outline of like a wooden spoon, a cord, or some kind of item, we've got a problem. Okay, that's where, and this is one thing, actually, the kids in school always ask me about the spanking. Is it against the laws of child abuse to be spanked? And I'm like, well, the answer that I always give them is, that's a family choice and a family issue, spanking. But if you're being spanked where you're being injured or you're being hit with something that's leaving a mark or a bruise long term, or if someone's hitting you with something and you see an outline of it, you need to report it yourself and get another grown-up involved to check that out. So size and shape is definitely a consideration. Inconsistent explanation. You guys as CASAs probably, on that end of it, hear all kinds of explanations of why a child is, showing up injured in a hospital the way that they, look. And if it's inconsistent and it doesn't make sense, it's probably abuse, okay? Or if the stories doesn't match with the parents. So there are times that, because I worked in childcare for many years, and there are some times where, children have fallen and it looks suspicious, but it's really what happened. They fell off the bed and the toy box was laying beside the bed and they've got a big, gash on the side of their head. And it makes sense if you hear the story. So that's definitely a consideration, is the explanations. Developmentally inconsistent, and we kind of talked about that, of what, if a baby doesn't move or cruise, is what we say, they shouldn't bruise. Okay, so if they're not walking, rolling, pulling up, or moving at all, probably 0 to 4 months. I always have people argue with me because they're like, oh, my 3-month-old set up, and that's okay. But usually we say 0 to 4 months. If they're not moving, they shouldn't have any kind of injury whatsoever. No bruises, no anything. Because what is a child that is non-mobile? How are they going to get injured? It's not going to be accidental. It's going to be definitely on purpose. And also the location, and we kind of touched on that. Now this is a slide showing typical injury areas. So if we've got a child that's going to fall, these are where that they're probably likely to hit. Okay, on the face, the A and the B is the facial area. Of course, we can see that happening. The neck, the ankles, the backs of the legs, the upper arms, the back, the front of the thighs, and we can see that happening in our head. Okay, what we can't see happening is the ones that have just turned red. Why is that child injured in their genital area? Why is that child injured behind their ears? Why is that child injured, in a weird place on their back where, the explanation with the fall does not match the injury. So the location is very important to stay vigilant about where is that injury and does it match the story that we've heard. Okay, reporting child abuse, and like I said, this is from ground zero is usually what I teach. So if you suspect that a child has been injured and you have a pretty good suspicion and you think that they need to be checked out by the CPS, we always want to report to them first. Okay, we call their hotline, and there's kind of a process. And you guys probably, Jen, you probably teach this in your class, your CASA class, is the process of what happens. Once that child gets reported, what's the process of the CPS coming in. They investigate, and what happens after that. If a child is in immediate danger, if you've got a child that's injured, you call 911 and you let them work out the, logistics later. So, if we've got a child that's hurt like that, we don't call CPS and say, I've got a child that, is highly injured, what do I do? We call 911 and it gets worked out after they get there. But a normal reporting is just calling and telling them your suspicion. You can do it anonymously. It's very helpful that you identify yourself. It's very helpful that you give them as much specific, detailed information as you can. You don't have to. Some people prefer just to say, I know this and this is what happened. But the likelihood of a case being opened and investigated thoroughly depends on how much information that they have. So if they've got somebody reporting and giving, you know, a wealth of information, and they have a plethora, they go in and say, I've got this and this is what we're looking for, it's more likely that they can help that child as opposed to, I'm calling, I'm anonymous, you know, they've got a bruise, go check it out. Okay, does that make sense? So we definitely want to make sure that we know how to report it and what's important information to convey when we do that. Reporting makes you nervous. First time I had to report a child abuse case, thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown. I was shaking like a leaf. But the people on the other end, they're very kind. They're very nice. They walk you through it, you know, and it's something that, you know, you don't want to do. You don't specifically want to like get involved in this, but, you know, you may be the person that saves that child. You may be the person that makes that call that makes a difference in whether that child lives or dies, or whether that child gets into a safe environment where they can flourish and become a, you know, a citizen that's productive later on in life. Okay, so this kind of slide kind of tells exactly what I just said. Okay, and that's kind of the end of the slide. So do you guys have any questions about anything? Did I skip over anything important that you think your CASAs need to know? Or
Jill, I have a question.
yes.
Do you know if you do make a report and you do self-identify so that they know who you are and not anonymously, will they let you know? Will they follow up with you and let you know the outcome of your report?
Typically, no. Once you report, no. You report and you're kind of at the, if you don't follow up or know somebody connected to the case where you can get information, that's pretty much all the last of your knowledge of what's going on.
Jill, one of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking about that, when you make the call now, even if you call the office in McCracken, like they'll tell you instead to call the centralized intake, which is a 1-800 number. And
Right.
Having been a part of that for several different phone calls, I really have I second what you said about the people are very warm and kind and help you walk through the steps. Because I think everyone would be very nervous, and you know it's not a phone call you ever want to make. But I was very impressed by how the process worked and how and I was with the victim that was actually crying hysterically on the other, you know, on the phone with them, and they got information and were able to get through it without, you know, making them feel it any more uncomfortable. I was just really impressed.
Right.
I think that the more people that knew what it was really like, I think would be less apprehensive to call.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's important too, to get this information out to the community so that they know what to do. What is the process? And so many people think, I think because they see things and they hear things, that you make a report and, you know, the social workers, you know, swoop in and snatch that child out of the home, and, you know, they never get to see their parents again. I think that's what people have, you know, built up in their mind, is like, oh, I don't want to get involved that far, you know, and the process really doesn't work like that at all. You know, the call is made. They determine, you know, what level it is. Do we need to go out there right now? Or they have up to 72 hours, is that correct? Making sure I'm giving the right information. Up to 72 hours, yes, to go and investigate that. You know, and there's a process that they just don't go and, you know, we don't want to snatch children out of their homes. You know, family reunification is, you know, the ultimate goal, as long as, you know, the parents and the child is safe and the parents are doing what they're supposed to do. Sometimes it's just a simple lack of parenting skills. You know, I don't know how to parent. Or I was abused when I was growing up, so that's how I'm going to, you know, discipline my child. You know, I was hit with a wooden spoon, so that's what I'm going to do to my child. And sometimes we get in this vicious cycle where that happens, you know, and the goal is that we go in and we educate the parents and that we help them to understand that, you know, this is a 2-year-old cannot sit down for, you know, 30 minutes. The expectations are way too high. And sometimes parents get frustrated. This is what I hear from some of the parenting classes that I've taught, is they're frustrated because their expectations are way too high. They want 1 and 2-year-olds to act like 5 and 6-year-olds, you know, and that's just not going to happen. And when they don't behave like that, they get frustrated. And when I get frustrated, you know, I'm going to get a little angry. And if I have anger issues anyway, that's compounded, and then I've hit my child. Okay. So what I would like to do actually in our communities is go to ground zero and say, you know, parents, here's what we do when we get stressed. We don't hit our child. This is what we do. We have, options of we do this and we do this, and give them the tools to actually not even get to that point. Now, I know that's a fairy tale statement, but in the perfect world, I would love to do that, is start at ground zero and teach these parents how to parent. I'm not the perfect parent. I have 4 kids that I probably have messed up myself, but I've done the best that I can. And so if we can get parents just doing the best that they can and to forgive themselves for not being perfect, then we could save a child that way, just from a very simple stress management class.
Jill, another question came in through the chat. So since we have this stay-at-home order, at least we have, and a lot of people are still being quarantined in their home, at least partially, and we're not seeing children out as much. The summer's going on, they're not in school. So what can we do? What would you recommend in terms of still being able to recognize child abuse, even though it's kind of harder to necessarily see the kids out there right now?
Right. And we probably are not going to see the fallout of that until we get back into school, until we get back into, going to our activities, getting back into church, going back to our big social events. We're probably not going to know the effects of what's going on right now with child abuse until that happens. We're very limited to where we go and what we do. But, when we go somewhere and, even to Walmart, it's just kind of like being educated and hyper vigilant about, what are we looking for. I do share this with my teachers, don't go on a witch hunt. We're not going to, we're not looking for child abuse. We're just wanting to educate ourselves that we can recognize if we see something. If we recognize that a child is, truly frightened, why is he frightened? Why is his behavior changed? What's going on? And the more education that we have, we're going to be more sensitive of that when we get into the groups and when we see the interactions between kids and parents. Unfortunately, we're not going to have the statistics until after, we get back into our normal, quote unquote, if we ever get back into our normal life where we're in groups, and we're seeing that interaction between, the parents and the children. And when I go into Walmart, it's getting a little bit different now, but when I go into Walmart earlier when the pandemic started, I hardly ever saw children. I mean, it was just adults running in and running out, and that makes it difficult too. So I'm sure there's things happening that we're not going to be aware of until, damage probably has been done. But the good thing is that, that damage can be reversed with, love and stability and, therapy and things like that. That can be, we can save these kids. I think you're.
Thank you,
Jill.
Jill.
Are you on mute? Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yes, very, very helpful.
One thing that I wanted to share too before we go is I've told you I've been reading a lot of CASA books, and one thing that I've read that stuck in my mind is the CASAs when they go and visit and have contact with their children in foster homes, is to make sure that you're hyper vigilant about what's going on in that home. Sometimes people are not what they seem. And the story actually that I read earlier in the week was that case, this foster mother from the, she was the model foster mother, but what was going on behind closed doors was, frightening. And they ended up, finding out removing the child. It was a happy ending. But when you go in and talk to your children, or if you're Skyping with them, pay attention to the little details, what's going on. Is that child acting differently from when I, saw them last week or, 2 weeks ago, or however long you guys have seen them. So it's just important to take that information anytime you have any interaction with your CASA child.
That's really good. Very, very good point. Definitely.